It's another edition of Time About the Movies, and we're jumping into a brand new month with this episode. We're jumping into November 4th, 1994, with 6 movies, and we're going to start off with the biggest new release of the weekend, and that is Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, starring and directed by Kenneth Branagh. I'm slowly but surely starting to realize that Kenneth Branagh probably really is one of those great directors that I don't think gets a whole lot of attention because when you really look at his filmography, I know a lot of people associate him with adaptations of William Shakespeare's work or period pieces and these type of things, but he has an assortment of different genres to his name. Like he does thrillers like Dead Again, does a movie like this, which is more of a horror movie. He does action films like Thor and Jack Ryan's Shadow Recruit. Does a family fantasy film with Cinderella. Can also do these mystery films. What he does with the Hercule Poirot series that he's been doing recently with Murder on the Orient Express and Death on the Nile. And he had a great film a couple years ago with Belfast, which is a really terrific film. And definitely here I could see a lot about what I like about him as a filmmaker is that he can make something very unique, very creative with a movie like this. I've really grown to appreciate this movie more over the years. It just continues to prove my point of how Sony kind of had their own dark universe before Universal tried to create their own dark universe because they had done different unique versions of Dracula and the Wolfman up to this point. Now you have Frankenstein here, and while it's definitely not the strongest of those three that I mentioned, this is still a pretty good adaptation. The cast overall is great. Tom Hulce, Helena Bonham Carter, Ian Holm, John Cleese, Aidan Quinn. Robert De Niro, I think, does a pretty good job playing the monster of Frankenstein. Here he's called The Creation. And it's considered the most faithful adaptation of the book, which is very interesting because they do make a lot of differences in here that are very different from the original book, but they actually kind of work here. Like, I really enjoyed this movie a whole lot. I think it deserves a lot more attention. It's not a masterpiece by any means. There are points where it gets a little too creative for its own good. Like it goes a little too over the top, but it's still a ton of fun. I really enjoyed this movie a whole lot. I think it deserves a lot more attention than it gets. And I remember watching this and having a really good time when I saw it. This was like years and years after it came out, and it was just like, I definitely see a lot of what they were trying to do here. They actually made it work pretty well. It's a very underrated film. Definitely check it out if you haven't seen it, because I think you would be pleasantly surprised if you really like Branagh's work and what he's able to do with these ideas like this. I think he makes this adaptation of Frankenstein work very well, and, considering some of the other Frankenstein movies that have come out since this one has come out, like the Victor Frankenstein with James McAvoy, I would say I would take this over that one any day of the week. So yeah, Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. So let's move on to the next movie that we have here, and that is Kevin Costner and Elijah Wood starring in the family drama The War. Most of this movie is just kind of sappiness. I think the best element of the movie is that father-son bond. Kevin Costner and Elijah Wood playing the father and son here. And it works pretty well. But where I think the movie kind of falls apart is the fact that they keep throwing in these little side plots. It gets a little bit too preachy. Like you have that scene where the little girl is standing up for the black girl in the classroom, which it's not a bad scene in particular, but it just kind of feels forced into it. It's just like there isn't really a good idea of what kind of a story they really wanted to tell. Like you have a family drama, but you also want to bring in this PTSD from war trauma and all that type of stuff, and it doesn't quite work. This is directed by John Avnet, who also did Fried Green Tomatoes, which was a pretty good film overall. But when I look at this movie, I think a lot of the problems with it comes in the fact that they want to try to explain way too much more than their intentions were. Like if you stuck to one single premise to this, maybe there would have been something interesting here. But other than that, though, I think the only reason you should see this movie is to see the chemistry between Costner and Wood as father and son. But other than that, I think this is a pretty sappy, mediocre film that just tries to be way too much. It has the feel of an Oscar baitish type of film, and it definitely shows. It's a movie that unfortunately does not hold up very well. So that's The War. So let's go ahead and move on to the next movie that we have here, and that is Double Dragon. Remember the days when we used to have a ton of video game movies come out and most of them ended up being terrible? Well, technically you can kind of say that now, but nowadays we have better movies like the Angry Birds movies, the Sonic the Hedgehog movies, Detective Pikachu. I'll even go as far as to say the Alicia Vikander Tomb Raider film that came out a couple years ago, but excuse me. But yeah, this is not a good movie. This is a film that you can clearly tell that the people who made this movie had no real idea what the video game was about. They only just took little bits and pieces on the video game, put them into a story that was very lackluster, tried to be another wannabe Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, and just fell apart on so many levels. Like, it really feels like the people that made this movie had no real intention of what the game was about, or wanted to make something unique or different, and just said, slap Double Dragon on it and people will come to see it. Well, guess what? People didn't come and see it. It bombed pretty badly, and even the people that were involved with the movie look back on this movie and say, yeah, that was a really bad idea. And it's just like, it really is a bad idea, and it would help if the situations were funnier, not even the funnier, if the situations more dire, but these villains that they have here are not threatening whatsoever. Like, these gangs that they keep coming in here are just really badly written. They're not intimidating whatsoever. Nothing about this makes any sense at all. And, like, it doesn't help when you even put the Double Dragon video game in the Double Dragon universe. It's just like, the universe should have just crumbled in on itself at that point. I mean, come on. It's just like, yeah, this is a terrible, terrible movie. And I think everybody involved knows it's a terrible, terrible movie. And, quite honestly, I don't know how you could adapt Double Dragon nowadays and make it into a serious movie, like something on the lines of what they've been trying to do with Mortal Kombat. But, I don't know, maybe it could be done. Who knows? Maybe there's somebody out there who could do it just that. But, until that day comes, we have this piece of junk right here, and that is, of course, the horrors of the Double Dragon 1994 movie. So, that's Double Dragon. Let's move on to the next movie, and that is David Mamet's Oleana with William H. Macy. I mean, I've talked about before how much I've liked David Mamet's work over the last couple of the years that we've looked at some of the movies that have come out. But this is one of those ones where I saw it. I saw it a couple years ago because I wanted to see some Mamet films. And this is one of those ones I think is very polarizing, largely because of, I don't think that David Mamet did a very good job of making both sides of the argument work out as well as they do. It's just kind of like it's one of the, like, it basically feels like the feature film adaptation of that commercial that used to play on TV in the 90s where the woman is just like, we're talking about sexual harassment and I'm not going to take it. It just kind of feels like that. Maybe it's like the whole idea is that you're supposed to decide which side is doing what, like who's right in the situation, and if you think you know what it is, you're wrong. And I don't think the movie does a very good job of clearly trying to give us an idea of which one is the right direction we should go. Which character should we be rooting for? And, you know, despite the best efforts of William H. Macy, who actually reprises his role from the play that they did, and it really doesn't have that same spark. Like, it feels like maybe on Broadway, maybe on a play, that maybe this could actually work out better. But in terms of a movie, like, I feel like this movie is trying a little too hard to try to get its point across, which is interesting because we looked at a movie that Mamet wrote a couple of weeks ago with Vanya on 42nd Street, which basically took place on one set, and that was much more compelling, that was much more intriguing because you like those characters more. Here, you just really don't like either one of these characters whatsoever. Like, you want to root for the right person, but you just don't feel that intensity and that spark, and even when it gets to the end, when you finally are supposed to figure it out, it doesn't really give you a good idea of what the purpose was in the end. It's just kind of like, yeah, it really is a missed opportunity. And David Mamet has not usually had a ton of missed opportunities as a filmmaker up to this point. He has made some really good movies and written some very good movies, but this is one that I feel like probably should have just stayed on Broadway. Probably should have just stayed as a play. Yeah, it's a very forgettable film, and that's a shame too because of what I've seen from Mamet since then. But so yeah, that's Oleana. Let's move on to the next movie, and that is Ted Danson and Mary Steenburgen starring in Pontiac Moon. Yet another Oscar bait-ish movie, and probably one of the worst examples of one. Like, Ted Danson's character in this, you just feel like he's forcing them to give him an Oscar nomination for this. And, you know, Mary Steenburgen already has an Oscar to her, but even she's acting her ass off way too hard in this, and not even in a good way. there's just nothing really all that investing about this situation or this idea. Like, what is the main purpose of this story? Like, what is the like? What am I supposed to get out of this? Like, okay, this father and son are going on an adventure to follow the Apollo 11 spacecraft as it's going into space and coming back from space, and at the same time, you really don't know what the end result of this is going to be. And when you get to the end result, it's just kind of like, is that really what this whole movie was about? It just feels like it's also one of those examples of a movie where you don't work with you don't work with your spouse on it, because I believe, actually, I don't know, Ted Danson and Mary Steenburgen were married at this point, or married in 1995, so it might have been when they met on this movie where they got together. But I don't know. Like, but even with that said, though, this is a very flimsy movie. It's not really all that investing. It's not really all that exciting. Nothing intriguing really happens in here. It's just kind of a dud, and it just feels like an Oscar baiters type movie. Like I've said before, it feels like a movie they're pushing for an Oscar, and they don't really have a good story to tell. And it definitely shows on screen here. It's a real missed opportunity on so many levels, because these two are very good actors, but just nothing there to work with. So that's Pontiac Moon. Let's move on to the last movie that we have here, and that is Floundering. Never seen this movie, so I'm not going to go too deep into it, but Peter McCarthy, if you don't know, he's the producer of some notable movies you saw in there: Repo Man, Sid and Nancy, I'm Gonna Get You, Sucker. Just some notable movies to his name, but there's a really good cast involved in this. You've got James LeGros, Lisa Zane, Ethan Hawke, Kim Wayans, John Cusack, Steve Buscemi, Billy Bob Thornton, Dave Navarro, Viggo Mortensen is in here. I mean, it could be pretty good. It does have decent reviews on Rotten Tomatoes from what I've seen from it, but the premise does sound interesting enough. It sounds like an intriguing movie, so I don't know. Could be good, but I'm not going to rush out to see it right now. So that's really all I got to say about that one. Very quick one to end this one. Floundering. And so on that note, we wrap up another edition of Time About the Movies. Next time we meet, we'll jump into the movies of November 11th, which luckily we only have 2 movies to look at, but they're 2 notable films. We have Tom Cruise, Brad Pitt, Christian Slater, and Kirsten Dunst in Interview with the Vampire, and also Tim Allen in the holiday classic, The Santa Claus. So 2 movies to look at next time around. We'll delve into those on the next episode. But until then, thank you very much for watching, and if you want to see more videos like this, please hit the playlist on the next page, check out the previous episode, and I'll see you guys tomorrow for another episode. So thank you for watching. I'll see you next time, and until then, as always, take care.